Well, hello, everybody. It is great to be with you again. I hope you all have been staying well throughout this time in quarantine. Um, I really miss our time meeting together. I miss getting to hang out with you guys and being squirrely. Um, but I know this is best right now, and we are striving to be patient. So hopefully, you guys have been able to find some fun things to do while you have been locked inside, or at least at your home. One thing Stacy and I have been doing is crossword puzzles. And so, believe it or not, if you go on usatoday.com, they have a daily crossword. And the first time we did one together, it was like 45 minutes. But yesterday, Stacy and I, get this, were able to complete an entire crossword in 15 minutes. So we are getting better each day. I feel like a grandma or a grandpa doing this, but hey, it's something fun to do. And so maybe that is a competition that I can give you guys right now. Sometime over the next week, try to beat Stacy and I's record, our time record, 15 minutes ish. So feel free to have a partner because we do them together. But try to beat 15 minutes. If you give it a shot, let us know. We'd love to hear from you. But hey, all that to say, hope you're doing well. I miss you guys terribly, but I'm also glad that we are able to do this youth lesson, at least virtually speaking, for the time being. Today we are going to talk about something incredibly important. Each week at Youth Group we only talk about things that I believe are critically important. But over the next 2 weeks, we are going to be diving into probably the most foundational and influential topics that we could ever discuss. And it has to do with this question on the screen behind me here. Why do I exist? What is my purpose as a human being? You see, our world gives us so many answers to this question. And the truth is, many of those answers that the world give us are wrong. The answers to this question that sometimes you and I believe from our culture just lead us to live a life that is wasted, a life that is unfulfilled, a life that is unsatisfying. But the blessing and the incredible truth that we're going to discover today is that God gives us the answer to this question. And so many of us watching right now are young people, middle school, high school. Hopefully your parents are watching with you as well. I know there's some youth leaders. But the truth is, this question is so critical. And the sooner you understand the correct answer, the God-given answer to this question, the better off you are going to be. And so, right when some of you see this question, you probably think, I already know the answer to this. I exist to what? Glorify God and make God known. And that is absolute correct. Absolutely correct. We exist as God's people to glorify God and to make Him known. But what I want to do today is really dive into the answer. What does it mean to glorify God? How do we exactly glorify God? And the answer to this question and the answer to how we truly glorify God with our lives can be found when we read Genesis 1:26 through 28. And so hopefully you can see the scripture. If not, feel free to read it in your Bible. Just click pause, grab your Bible, do what you need to do. But I want to read this to you. God says to us in His Word, this is really the first chapter in the Bible. He's just talking about Adam and Eve. It's a creation story. And it says, Then God said, Let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, over the livestock and all the wild animals, and over all the creatures that move along the ground. So God created mankind in His own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. Verse 28, God blessed them and said to them, be fruitful and increase in number. Fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky and over every living creature that moves on the ground. These 3 verses are foundational for our understanding of what our purpose is as children of God. And I went ahead and tried to summarize those 3 verses, and this is what I came up with. God created humanity to be image bearers. We were created in the image of God. So God created all of humanity to be image bearers so that they may rule over creation, fill the earth, subdue it, and control it. You know, this comes directly from those 3 verses that we just read. God created humanity to be image bearers so that, with the purpose of ruling over creation, filling the earth, subduing it, and controlling it. And so, I think there are 2 critical points that we need to understand if we are going to understand what our purpose is as children of God and how we glorify God. The first question that we got to ask ourselves is, what does it mean to be made in the image of God? The second question is, what is meant by ruling? God created us to rule, but what does that mean? And so for the rest of the time here today, we are going to be asking those 2 questions. But I want to start by asking this question: what does it mean to be an image bearer? What does it mean to be made in the image of God? You know, some scholars suggest that what it means to be made in the image of God is simply that we are relational creatures. Because we enjoy relationships with one another more than really animals do. You know, that's what it means to be created in the image of God. Sure, I think that's partially correct. Other scholars over the history have said to be in the image of God means that we are not only relational creatures, but we are creative creatures. We do inventions, we have art and culture. Again, I think that's partially correct. Still, other people say we're created in the image of God, and that means that we have a sense of morality. Like, animals don't really have a sense of morality. We know right from wrong. And once again, I think, yeah, that's partially correct. But I think there is a greater understanding of what it means to be an image bearer of God. You see, John Piper really talks about, what does it mean to be made in the image of God? Well, it simply means to image God. It's quite a simple statement. I want you to think about a statue for a minute. I pulled up a picture of Abraham Lincoln. This is a statue of President Abraham Lincoln, the 16th President of the United States. Most people say one of the greatest, if not the greatest president to ever rule over our country. And Abraham Lincoln is largely remembered for abolishing slavery. He is largely remembered for being somebody who highly valued human freedom, the dignity of every single human being, regardless of the color of skin, socioeconomic class. He valued all human beings. He's valued for courage. He is remembered for bringing this country back together. And so at one point in our country's history, we decided that we wanted to make a statue of Abraham Lincoln. This statue is created in the image, physical image, of Abraham Lincoln. But more importantly, this statue was created to remember the character of Abraham Lincoln. every time a tourist goes to Washington, D.C., up to the Lincoln Memorial, they are reminded of the great courage that Abraham Lincoln had. They're reminded of human dignity. They're reminded of human freedom. Every time somebody sees this image of Abraham Lincoln, they're reminded about the abolition of slavery. They remember what this man has done for this country. They're reminded about who he is. Now, with this particular image in your mind, think about this. God created you, me, all of humanity in his own image. You see, God created mankind to reflect him. God created mankind to image who God is to the rest of the world. So whenever somebody goes up to you and I, we are called to display God. We're called to reflect God. We are called to communicate to whoever is looking at us how great God is. Think of yourself as a living statue. When people look at you, they remember who God is. I hope that illustration made sense. And if it doesn't, I want to give you a second illustration. Think of your life like a mirror. I want to introduce you to Mr. Orange Man here. Mr. Orange Man, this is the skills that I possess here with PowerPoint. I'm just terrible with technology. This is creative as I could get. But Mr. Orange Man here is here to illustrate the fact that when you look in a mirror, you see the reflection of yourself back at you, right? Your image is reflected in the mirror. Now I want to twist this. Like I said, I want you to think of yourself as the mirror. If we go to this next slide, your life is a mirror. God created you to be a mirror of who God is. And so I want you to think of this. God calls you to reflect the image of God through the way that you live your life. God creates you to reflect who he is to the rest of the world. Because God is a loving God, God calls you to reflect God's love to the rest of the world through how you live. Because God is a God of mercy, he calls you to reflect God's mercy to the world through the way that you live. Because God is a God of compassion, he calls you to reflect that compassion to the rest of the world. Because God is a God of forgiveness. I can't remember if I said that one already. We are called to reflect that forgiveness to the rest of the world. You see, God created you to be an image bearer, to image God to the rest of the world. So, when people look at you, they're actually seeing a trace of who God himself is. We are called to be mirrors. We're called to reflect him, display God. We're called to communicate God with how we live our lives. You are a living statue, and you are a mirror. And so I hope that really helps you understand a little bit about what it means to be made in the image of God. Secondly, let's move to this next question. What does it mean to rule over creation? You see, ruling over creation and being created in the image of God are correlated. They cannot be separated. They go hand in hand with one another. And so I just want to ask this question. What does it mean to rule over creation? To remind you, in verse 28 of Genesis 1, it said that Adam and Eve were to be fruitful, increase in number. They were called to fill the earth and subdue it. It says, rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the sky, and over every living creature that moves along the ground. This might surprise you, but God created humans to rule, to reign. God created human beings to fill the earth. to populate the earth. God created human beings, as the language in Genesis says, to reign, to subdue. That word subdue means to control. To reign, to rule, to subdue, to control, they're all kind of synonymous with one another. Perhaps a better word to describe it is God calls mankind to steward the earth. In the same way that God stewards the universe, you and I are called to steward over the earth. He calls us to govern the earth. He tells us to be creative. God, you see, created family. He created the concept of family. God created the concept of business. God created the concept of agriculture. God created the concept of education. God created the concept of all of these different things. God designed humans to do all of these things. That's what's meant by ruling and reigning, stewarding. God has given us the ability to do all of these things. Now, it's important to note that there are two different ways to rule. There are two different ways to govern. There are two different ways to live our lives. You can either choose to rule the earth by reflecting God, but you can also rule the earth in the image of your own self. If you look around the world, our world has no problem ruling. We are filling the earth, we're populating the earth, we are governing the earth. One may argue whether we are being good stewards of the earth, but the truth is we can all rule. We love being rulers. But the question we got to ask ourselves are we being image bearers? Are we ruling the earth in the image of God, or are we ruling the earth in the image of fallen humanity? You see, unfortunately, I think our world, instead of ruling the world with love and grace and mercy and forgiveness and selflessness, we are ruling the earth with greed, with hatred. We're ruling the earth with selfishness. We are ruling the earth in the image of fallen humanity. So many people in our world do not reflect who God is by the way that we live our lives. But God created us to rule this earth in a way that reflects Him, not fallen humanity. And so, in summary of all of this, I believe our primary purpose in life, this is the key, our primary purpose in life is to glorify God by reigning over the earth in a way that reflects Him. This is our purpose. God created you and I, all of humanity, to rule over the earth in a way that reflects Him. And when we are image bearers of Him, rather than image bearers of ourselves and fallen humanity, we will glorify God. This is our primary purpose. So, God created some people to have families, but He wants us to do family in a way that reflects Him. He's created some of us to be businessmen, but He wants you to be a businessman or woman in a way that reflects Him. God created some of you to be teachers, but He wants you to teach in a way that reflects Him. God created some of you to be politicians, but He wants you to govern in a way that reflects Him. God created some of us to get married, but to do marriage in a way that reflects Him. You see, all of us probably have some different secondary purpose in life. God has created some of us to be teachers, pastors, businessmen, family men, God has created some of us to be firefighters. We all may have different secondary purposes, but God has given us all the same exact primary purpose, and that is to rule over this earth by reflecting the image of God. And when we do that, we will glorify God. Don't forget your primary purpose. So, in conclusion, I just want to end by discussing some ways that this can be lived out practically. What implications this message really has on our lives. The truth is, this message should affect so many different areas of your life. First, it should affect our heads. This message should affect our heads. This message should affect what we think about. You see, this should correct our false understanding. Our primary purpose in life is not to be a politician. It should transform the way that we think. We know that our primary purpose in life isn't to be a husband or a wife. It's not to be a teacher. It's not to have any career. It's not to be successful. It's not to be prominent. It's not to be beautiful. It's not to have a boyfriend or girlfriend. No. Our primary purpose is to glorify God by ruling and reflecting God. So get that into your brain. Let that transform what you think about your purpose in life is. Not only should this message impact our head and what we think about, but it should also affect our heart. It should affect what we desire. Due to the fact that our primary purpose is to glorify God through ruling the earth in a way that reflects Him, we should desire that. We don't need to desire riches. We don't need to desire fame. We don't need to desire a good job. We know that we can live out our God-given purpose here on this earth simply by living a life that reflects Him. I don't know about you, but that just takes so much weight off of me. My primary purpose is simply to glorify God. My primary purpose is to reflect Him. Everything else is simply secondary. I can live a fully satisfied life, fully content, knowing that I'm living a life that honors God. Thirdly, not only should this message impact our head, what we think, our heart, what we desire, but it should, in fact, really influence our hands, what we do with our lives. In light of this message, I want to encourage you to live every aspect of your life in a way that reflects God. Do family in a way that reflects God. Be a son or daughter in a way that reflects God. Do a relationship with your friends or maybe a significant other in a way that reflects God. Be a student in a way that reflects God. Be an employee in a way that reflects God. Whatever you do, do it all in order to reflect God, so that when people look at your life, the way that you live your life, no matter what you're doing, when people see you, they will in fact see the very character of God. Orchard Hill Youth Group, it is my hope and it is my prayer that your head would be transformed, that your heart would be transformed, and your very life would be transformed through the simple truth that we exist primarily to glorify God by reigning over His earth in a way that reflects God Himself. So let's do that as we live our lives this week in every single area of our life, but also as we live out the remainder of our days. Be encouraged, be faithful, and worship God through glorifying Him. I hope you guys all have an incredible week, and I look forward to the day that we can once meet again in public at youth group. So guys, I love you all. Stay well. and we'll be in touch soon. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next week.